Okay, I'm back. I disassembled the old needle and seat right here and polished this pin up a little bit. I had a tough time getting that pin out of there. Usually it's not that hard. And then also, what wasn't on the old one, but you get it in the kit, there's this little spring here that acts kind of like a damper. Now that thing's a pain in the rear end to get in. I did that off camera. And again, if I had smaller fingers, it probably wouldn't be so bad, but my big fat fingers just don't fit in there very well. But you've got a retainer that goes on each side here, and then the spring clips right there, and then right there, and that holds that in there. And then the little flapper kind of goes up against there, and it kind of, supposedly, when you're driving down the road and you're hitting bumps, or you're accelerating or whatever, it's supposed to keep the float from bouncing around as much. A lot of times people didn't put that in there, they didn't know what the heck it is, and I think on the earlier ones they didn't even have that on there. That was like a later improvement, so definitely wanted to get that in there. Drop that down like that. Slide the pin in. It's a lot easier to do all this basically out of here, and then once you get that all in there, then you can put it into here. Okay, so that goes in just like that, and you've got two washers. The one that goes on the screw itself takes the smaller of the two. The inside diameter is the same, but the outside diameter is larger on one compared to the other. And the one that goes on the screw takes the smaller one. Get a tad bit of lubriplate on that. It's a little bit of a juggling act too, getting those two washers to stay in there, but it's not that bad. Okay, you'll notice this thing will rotate around. You want to try and get it as level as possible before you have it totally tight. This is something you want to make sure is reasonably tight, because you got to get them copper washers to seat. That should do it. And you flip this around. You actually, what you want is you want the float to be basically level. Right now it isn't, but that's what you're after, is the float to be level. You know, looking at that, this thing should have had an E-clip on there. It never had an E-clip on it. I'm not sure I have any E-clips that size. So I might have to stop right here and see if I can't get some. I might have some in one of my other carburetor kits. Well, I couldn't find a E-clip small enough to fit on there, but I did find a hairpin type clip that slipped on there quite tightly, and it seems to be very snug. It's facing down, and I don't see any reason why that won't work just fine. So we'll try that out and see what happens. Next step is, now that you've got the bolt holding the needle and seat tight, have to screw on the actual fuel inlet fitting. Same thing with it, a little bit of lubrication. There's a little gasket that goes on there as well. That runs in a little bit tight too. Want to get this good and tight. Don't want any fuel leaking out of it. But at the same time, you don't want to strip the threads. It's kind of a little bit of a balancing act. So that leaves the glass fuel bowl. I used some, this was pretty filthy. I used some Formula 409, let it soak in there overnight, and that broke apart a lot of the dirt that was in there. Got that out of there. Now this has a metal retainer, and then back behind that metal retainer there's kind of like a gasket. I think it's more of a kind of like an isolation gasket, so you're not chipping the glass. Well, I tried pulling this off. I really couldn't get it off, and I don't want to damage this float bowl because they're getting to be very rare. So I decided to leave this on. It doesn't seal fuel at all. That's the this gasket here. So I decided to leave this on, and we'll see what happens. If it ends up being an issue, well, we'll pull it back off and see if I can't get it off. But I'd rather not mess around too much with this, because one of the big reasons why there aren't many of them around is because people break them over tightening them and probably trying to take that little gasket off of there. So got this gasket here to put on. The kit came with one of these, and then also with what was supposed to be an upgrade of a cork gasket. I don't really, personally, don't consider cork gaskets to be upgrades. That's just my opinion, and I'm going to use this fiber gasket instead. Put that on there and make sure the Holley logo is facing down, because you can get this on upside down. And I'll set this aside here. I'll get each one of these screws lubed up again. You've got these little screws and then these little clips. These carburetors are pretty simple. There's not much to them. They're a little bit different than some of the ones that you normally see, but there's really not much to them. It's taken me longer to clean the parts up and mess around with the camera than it is just putting a stupid thing together. But I thought maybe this video would be helpful to somebody, so that's why I'm making it. And obviously this isn't a carburetor restoration, this is a carburetor rebuild. I'm not restoring this carburetor, which is obvious considering this hardware is rusty and whatever else. I really don't have the facilities to restore this. I don't have a soda blaster or anything like that. At one time it would have been probably worth my time to do that, but all the more often I rebuild carburetors anymore, it just wouldn't be worth it to get the equipment to soda blast the parts and replate them and everything else. There's plenty of other companies out there that used to do it anyways. I don't know if there's much business in doing this anymore. Got to get this kind of centered up, make sure it's centered up. And then same thing as what I've been preaching all along. A little bit of the time, this screw here happens to be going in kind of tightly, so that's why it's running tight, not because it's actually even touching yet. There, it just touched. And then these clips, make sure you got them straight on, not going in at an angle. And just work your way around. Don't want to go too tight on it. And also what you don't want to do is you want to make sure that the glass isn't up over this lip. You want to make sure it's contacting the gasket the whole way around. Sometimes these will slide around a little bit as you're tightening it up. Looks like this one did a little bit. So we'll back these screws off a hair. The closer you can get this to being centered in that gasket, the more likely that you're not going to have problems with leaks. This is probably about the most difficult part of this rebuild, is getting this glass bowl on there tight enough that it doesn't leak, but not so tight that you crack it. What we might just do, I'll leave these somewhat loose, obviously not totally loose. And then once we get this bolted onto the engine, if we do it and get it warmed up, then we can adjust the screws to where there aren't any possible leaks. But I'm thinking this is probably about tight enough for this carburetor for now. So there you go. There's a glass bowl Holley carburetor. That's basically everything that needs to be done to it, and hopefully that's a little bit somewhat useful to you. I guess one thing I do have to do, I have to take care of this accelerator here. I still think that this arm might be bent a little bit. I'll have to maybe see if I can adjust it a little bit, but other than that, I'm finished with this carburetor. So that's it for that. A little bit of a quick prologue here. This is a couple days later. I decided to mess with this linkage because I just knew it wasn't right, and essentially what happened is what I think happened. That thing got bent because this was seized up, and as you can see now, any throttle movement at all, I've got accelerator pump movement, which is good. And also I replaced this hitch pin here with a little newer circlip type of clip that seems to hold a little better. And then I put the hitch pins through here instead of the little cotter pin, which was a little bit on the flimsy side. But just thought I'd show this little prologue that I did take care of that. It was kind of a pain getting that straightened out, because once you straighten this, then it wanted to twist this, and then when you go full throttle, it wanted to stick. Now it runs pretty good, so should be good to go.